I'd like to call the June 29th, 2020 planning meeting of the Pine-Richland School Board to order. I'll recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, Ms. Williams.
Mr. Lyons.
Here.
Mrs. Misbach.
Here.
Mr. Kashani. Dr. Campbell.
Here.
Mr. DiTullio.
Here.
Dr. Mihalik.
Here.
Dr. Meyer.
Here.
Mr. Moy.
Here.
Mrs. Swope.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barb. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We know during this crisis we want to stay nimble, flexible, but also aligned with our strategic plan. So having this special meeting is part of that. Do we have any visitors, Ms. Williams?
We do not.
Thank you. And no correspondence?
Correct.
All right. With that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Miller for item 2.01.
Yeah, so just very briefly, I put some updates in public content for the board and for the community if they want to see it. So the Pine-Richland Healthcare Leadership Council, the structure of that is working well. We've had you don't need to open anything up, Sean. We've had 2 meetings, and a third one is scheduled for July 9th. We're doing a lot of work in between those meetings, and so in functional groups, depending upon the area of focus. So a lot of really good progress. Our community experts, who are also parents in most cases or have past graduates, have been really open and I would say cohesive in their feedback and evaluation. Everything we're hearing from Allegheny County Health Department and the experts in our group and other agencies are aligning. So what they're basically saying is it's not going to be simple. There will be challenges. You cannot eliminate risk, but you can reduce risk. And those certain precautions, however, should be a part of the planning. So we've been really aligned with that. We included a link here over the weekend. I'm still getting communications from our Pine-Richland Healthcare Leadership Council experts. And the American Academy of Pediatrics link, if you haven't seen that, we put it here in public content. Again, it's lockstep in the thinking around preparation for return to school. Obviously, Allegheny County, if you haven't heard or seen the news in the last couple of days, Allegheny County has seen increased cases and reported those. So the last week was certainly an increase. And so as that increase in confirmed cases is happening, they're putting in additional precautions or restrictions. So again, all of that. But again, this is just a quick update. The 2 links that are in there, one to the 60-page document released through Pennsylvania Department of Ed, and then the American Academy of Pediatrics, are just good, helpful links to review. And again, based on all of that work, that led to a number of changes to 3.01 in terms of the game plan. But it's also important to note as we transition into that item that, day to day and week to week, one of the comments by the director of the Allegheny County Health Department and by our experts as well is it's almost trying to plan 2 months out for something that's changing every 2 days or 2 weeks is a difficult target to hit. And so we need to do our best thinking, but you can't, it's going to be an iterative, messy type of process. Any questions on 2.01?
I have a question. It might be a little preliminary for this, but do you think that our reopening plan will look different from K through 6 versus 7 through 12 because of the age of the students and the type of school that, like the school environment with changing classrooms and everything? Or do you think it'll be uniform across K-12?
I think that the general approach is designed to be similar with developmental differences. And so a lot of the work that's being done, and you'll see more of this on July 13th, or even before that with an update, but In each case, it would be modified, adjusted depending on the developmental appropriateness or the manner in which the programs are delivered. So certain things would be happening differently K-3 than how they would happen in 9 through 12, but there are still some fundamental principles that are the same. So again, more to come, but I would also suggest because this is a late ad, take a look at that American Academy of Pediatrics link, because there's some nice things that are around that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, maybe if it's all right, Mike, you can sort of segue into 3.01 just to talk a little bit about the changes.
Yep.
Sure. Yeah, based upon, again, I spoke with some board members as well, that they provided some feedback, and we appreciate that. And as Brian mentioned, based upon some updates and things we're hearing, through health professionals and what we're seeing in Allegheny County, we did make some modifications to what you saw last Monday at the board meeting. So I put a summary and administrative content. You can see that again, we modified just to stay consistent with Pine-Richland policy of that 100 degrees. You'll see a lot of 100.4, but now you'll see consistently throughout the plan is 100 degrees kind of our threshold. We did add specific language about students to wear masks, so you'll see that in the plan and in the presentation. So unless other documented health conditions, we are recommending students wear masks. There are and will be times when coaches would direct students to take the mask off. We describe that as distance running, high intensity activity. So we do have a meeting right after this at 2:30 with our coaches to go over in detail with the plan and that presentation that was shared out to answer some of those questions. But again, we're going to work to keep the kids as far apart as possible when they're doing those more intense workouts. We did add language about the weight room, so max at 25 in the weight room and required masks at all time while in the weight room. I think Mr. Lyons at some point asked about just clarification around the concession stand. We put some language in the document, just clarity that we're not looking and talking about concession stand until phase 3, which we get into competition. And again, as we've been talking, I'm sure we'll be making modifications as we move through this. I think that was the majority. We did make another public copy, and we just blurred out the content around safety and security because we did add a section in around if there is a weather emergency or if there's a need to evacuate for other safety reasons. We put some details in this plan that's really specific for the schools and the coaches, but the community doesn't need to see that. And then in terms of rolling this out, Rachel's worked with myself and Mr. Simmons to have a e-blast ready to go, provided this is board approved this afternoon. That will go out right after this meeting to our all of our families, K through 12, so they can see it. But specifically to those that are involved in fall varsity sports, they are the ones that are starting up here. Some are starting this week. And they'll need to go over the district plan and the individual plans that the coaches are putting together. And basically there's a waiver agreement that they need to sign off on. Once that's received, then the coaches can get that started. So we're anticipating field hockey, soccer, both boys and girls starting as early as this Wednesday if all that paperwork comes in and their individual plans are approved. Football is looking to start on July 6th. That's this next Monday. Volleyball is going to start virtually. So they are going to be working through Google Meet and will continue to condition through virtual meetings and putting plans out. Tennis is not going to start. They typically don't do too much in terms of conditioning over the summer. They do a lot of individual work over the summer. And cross country, I do not have a start date as of right now. I should have a start date for cross country at our meeting this afternoon.
Hey, Matt.
Hey, I have a question. So you mentioned how this situation is always evolving, and we have to make very rapid pivots when that happens. One of the things that in a situation like this that can help is beginning to sketch out guidelines for when certain thresholds are crossed. And what I'm thinking about are many activities in schools are in a cohort type of scenario where you've got a classroom or you've got a football team or a weight room. And so how this isn't really necessary for the current document, but after that gets released and activities are put underway, is what triggers actions for the suspension of a cohort activity. Is there a certain number of people who have to have temperatures above a critical threshold? I think this is something that maybe the healthcare group may be able to provide some insight on, as well as some of the documents that are coming out. The idea here is to try to get ahead of this. What happens and what causes the most problems is if people who have the authority to make decisions start making those decisions, but it's not clear why. One group may decide to proceed and another group may decide to back off. I know it may not be possible to be entirely consistent across all of these, but a process for sketching out some of these parameters might be useful or helpful for us, so that come September and we've got many cohorts doing things, and if something does come up, people don't feel singled out or the authority of people making decisions is in question. So anyhow, it's just a perspective that I wanted to offer up that may be useful for us going forward.
Thank you.
I would add this, Dr. Mihalik. So those are exactly when we have our AIU calls and Dr. Bogan and other Allegheny County Health Department officials are on those calls. Those are the exact questions that are being discussed. And not necessarily even from an athletic standpoint, but from a return to school standpoint and how this should be made.
I think I may have forgot to mention, we did put a podcast together too. So we've heard from our community, some like the podcast, some like the written form. So they'll get both the written form of the presentation and the podcast. So they can, either one will be an option for them.
I have a question too. I would like to understand the scale of this initiative. So like, how many students usually participate in the summer sports, in the summer activities?
I can't give you exact numbers. I mean, I can give you a rough estimate. For example, soccer, I think they're looking at about 60 students that are interested. We have advertised that this is a voluntary opportunity. So I don't know until we get people to start filling out that acknowledgement waiver form. We won't have those numbers. I'll have them soon. So by early next week, I should have exact numbers for you.
Okay, and the band is also like a couple hundred students from what I understand, right? The band.
Would you repeat that, please?
The band would be in phase 2, Mrs. Swope. So if you look on page 8 of the plan, and it breaks down. So summer conditioning is sort of the least formal. It's formal in terms of planning, but it's more, it's that early stages. Band camp falls within phase 2. And again, we anticipate, like many other places, learning, understanding, evaluating new information, revising, etc. And it's a planned process in a fluid understanding. And again, we feel that we're heading in the right direction here in terms of, the precautions and approach.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
So to follow up on that, I'm comfortable with this for phase 1. This plan I think is good for phase 1. I don't think there's enough information for phase 2 and phase 3 at this time, especially with band camp and the indoor nature of the rehearsals, for this to be, for me to approve phase 2 and phase 3 implementation based on this plan. So I'd be comfortable voting for phase 1 and moving forward with that, but I think we have more work to do for phase 2 and phase 3.
Again, I understand your point, and so we respect that. The other thing I would say is we have health and safety plan for the entire school district coming. So that's going to be something for everything. And, you know, the purpose of this, I don't, this is my 2 cents. My preference would be the board approves the plan with the understanding that phases 2 and 3 are further out and will require additional consideration. To suggest that additional detail would even remain, the challenge of this is a moving target as the experts continue to learn. We are dialed in to the very best experts in this region in terms of supporting our plan. And so what I believe is that we would bring revisions forward to the board over time. It will not be both for this athletics and activities and then later for other plans. I think this is going to be something that is sort of becomes a part of the way we operate. It's a key strategic initiative. It will be something that we spend time on literally at each and every meeting to know whether it needs to be refined, improved, changed. And that could either be because of what we're learning on the inside, or it could be because of something that we're learning externally based upon the expert.
Now, hopefully, you know, we put that in the public content too, that as we prepare to move from one phase to the next, likely modifications will come forward prior to those phase changes. And again, we'll look for ongoing support to make the right recommendations there. You know, this time we'll be shifting into, for example, with band camp, really Mr. Scott and Mrs. Bowman getting more actively involved in developing their individualized plan to support the kids coming back, which will then link to, you know, some of the modifications we're making as well.
Yeah, I would even say, and one of the approaches we've taken as a district is each coach, each sponsor is taking the plan language and requirements and making sure that they can adapt that for what actually happens to their sport. You can't even have a one size fits all. So we have a lot of core principles that are in here, and then each coach has to own and understand that. And then based upon the type of activity, the size of the group, and all the other factors that impact their activity, they're making some, you know, they're submitting something that is further reviewed.
So my question is, if we approve this, you know, for something like band camp, which isn't fully laid out in here, you know, is this giving the green light to go ahead with band camp without any additional planning, or does the board then further need to approve the plans for band camp or competitions in phase 3, which might, you know, could have audiences and other things like that? So what I'm just curious what the approval process is for that, or what the, you know, the adaptation process is for that.
My understanding, and Brian, jump in if you disagree, but my understanding is this initial approval was meant to get athletics started, you know, conditioning started. We went kind of above and beyond and thought more than just athletics. We thought about other groups coming back. So in terms of what the state requires, minimum is athletics kind of phase 1. We're trying to, again, think a bit beyond that and start thinking about activities after school that will link into that master plan that we're referencing to. So my feeling is we're in a really good place for minimum, and we've gone a bit beyond minimum, and we're ready to make adjustments as we learn more.
Absolutely correct.
Would we be able to vote then on, you know, approving the plan with phase 1 moving forward as written, but then, you know, require additional board votes at you know, maybe the next meeting for phase 2 and phase 3 if they're ready?
Yeah. So again, that's up for the board's discussion. You know, I don't know what to tell you other than our hope is to have a tentative, broad health and safety plan ready for the board to look at and the community in writing by July, whatever our July meeting is. I think it's the 13th. So not that the board would need to vote on it on the 13th, but we need to have the details sufficiently fleshed out at this time. So again, this is going to work in concert. So the health and safety plan for the district will be the broadest umbrella with specific details. This plan, although it's coming forward first, will live underneath the umbrella of the district's health and safety plan. And so we need to have it fleshed out enough that when we resurvey our parents in particular, they have a clearer idea of what will it look like, feel like, sound like as we prepare for return to school. So we're more than happy to bring additional versions of revised plans forward to the board for repeated action if the board likes it, no problem. So we can live this plan, this athletics and activities plan, and we can plan right now to bring forward to the board a revised version on July 13th. And we'll just be marking and considering changes. Again, my only caveat to that is we cannot ever feel like just because you can see sufficient detail today that turns out to be dead wrong tomorrow. And so I think that, to me, that's the reality of this, is we don't want a false sense of security like, hey, I saw it chapter and verse and now we're good. Whatever, it's just it's a iterative kind of thing. And so I'm more than comfortable with our team bringing forward sort of the versions over time. And that'll, again, this is the most important thing we're doing. There is nothing more important than this topic, and I'm happy to bring it forward each time.
I have a question on, I believe I'm following it the way it's written, but I have a question about it if I am. On, I think it's page 6, 15, and 20, they talk about the weight room specifically, and then they talk about high intensity activities. So in the weight room, you have to wear a mask all the time, but high intensity activities, you can take it off if directed by the coach. In the weight room, if you're engaged in lifting weights, I would consider that a high intensity activity. As a matter of fact, breathing is probably the most important part of that. Am I reading that correct, that they still have to wear a mask while engaged in high intensity training in the weight room, just not other places?
That's the way we have it written. So in the weight room, because we're indoor and our space is limited. Now, we limited the number of participants to 25. Spread people out in that space. And this is the weight room we're talking in this stadium, obviously not in the building, not in the high school. The expectations are to wear, unless there's other health restrictions, to wear that mask at all times in the weight room. Now, if they're doing some more of the cardio with the weights where it's, you're really getting your heart rate elevated, then, the recommendation is to do that outside and spread the kids out. Kind of like your CrossFit type of stuff. But when you're lifting, you're pushing heavier weight, meaning bench press, squats, that has to be accomplished in the weight room. There are some spotter guidelines with spotting at the ends of the bar instead of over the person. So there's some guidelines there, but again, the recommendation is mask in weight room.
So I'm comfortable with the plan as a starting point and to begin summer conditioning. I agree with Ben. I'd like to see this circle back. For instance, minor point, the concession stand. I'm not sure how I feel about booster group concessions in the fall, but it's mentioned here. But I would hope we have time to reflect, and we do. We have the July meeting. We have August 3rd, which predates, for instance, phase 2. So we have a couple of check-in points still. I do think it's important in the public communication to convey that this is by no means, I would say this, I think it's accurate to say, I don't know what fall sports look like entirely. I don't know what fall sports look like the first week of September yet. We're not even trying to answer that question today, right? I think that's very important to convey. I don't know what our stadium looks like. I don't know, and I'm not trying to answer those questions today, here and now. That's important to convey in the communication.
Spectators and all of those are question marks right now. So we agree.
I think generally there might be two conceptual categories of decisions that can help us prepare. There are some issues where we probably want to know what the conditions whether they're met or not, in order for something to proceed. And then there are conditions that need to be met for something to be stopped or curtailed. And it depends on the different issues, right? There's a whole array of many different issues that are coming up. But it might be helpful knowing which of those activities is it more critical for us to specify the conditions for moving forward, and which to specify conditions for curtailing something. It's really two different dimensions of risk for some activities.
So I wanted to make either a suggestion or put a thought out there that, we've talked about the face shields as well. And is it to be assumed that those could be used in the weight room, and that would be much easier breathing when you are doing high intensity lifting, and then using a mask otherwise, if they're able to?
Well, again, in this issue of COVID-19, it is fundamentally easier to ask questions than answer them. So the challenge, Chris, is we can bring that question back to our healthcare leadership council experts. I can share that question with Allegheny County Health Department, but we cannot definitively answer that question because, CDC would suggest that cloth masks, unless there are certain heightened conditions underlying it, where you would want an N95 or some other heightened procedures, but cloth masks serve to as a good barrier and reduce risk. They don't eliminate it. Mm-hmm. Face shields provide benefit, and Dr. Bogan, but there's not a ton of literature on the face shields. There's not studies. There's not empirical findings around that. And so at this point, we would not substitute face shields in for the cloth masks on this issue. It may turn out that as more information is learned about that, face shields are definitely better than nothing. But at the same time, we're going to have to take that in cautious steps because the people who are vetting this stuff, whose whole livelihood and job is understanding, evaluating, considering, recommending, we're not there yet. So we're looking at it, but we're not quite there yet.
Okay.
You'll see reference to shields in the plan. Our thinking there was on a student by student case basis. That may be something that we have to explore for them. So where a mask can't work, but maybe a shield can, we have a whole section on what do you do for an individual that wants to participate and has some other health conditions that we have to consider. Now, I think most are going to opt not to at this point, but we have that in there to consider on a student by student basis.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That would be in collaboration with their health care provider, our trainers, obviously a whole group of people would be developing that individualized plan.
And I want to go back to something that Peter said about sort of using September or, the start of fall sports as an example of that. So I'm planning a communication within the next 10 days as well that'll hit a number of points, provide clarity, but also indicate the amount of question marks that are out there. The external agencies could take all of so we could have we've had dozens of hours of debate across multiple settings about whether students should or should not wear a mask, whether they're required or not required to wear a mask. In one day, all of that dialogue and debate can change because cases are going up and the Allegheny County Health Department director says, thou shalt wear masks, period, end of story. And so this is the reality of things. Same with September. We might have a beautifully written plan that we're trying to execute with fidelity in the district, and the region indicates returning to school is our priority. Returning to sports is important, but not the priority, and therefore we're calling a timeout on any co or extracurricular activity. This is the stuff that could happen that we just don't know about. What we've heard thus far is that the public health experts, the one thing they're not saying is they're not saying that they believe we will be headed back to a shutting down the educational system in the United States of America again. They are, even with the changing waves of things, we're not hearing that language. And in fact, they're saying the opposite. You know, returning is necessary for a variety of reasons around adolescent development. And for us, as we get into the direct academic educational side of things, it's why we have we're going to face the challenge. We need to do in person well and with precautions that can be executed. We need to do full-time virtual well at a high quality of learning experience for students. And we have to plan and anticipate that some percentage of our students and staff will be shifting back and forth depending on other factors. So, for example, a family may want their child to be in-person instruction. However, dad or mom becomes confirmed positive for COVID. Therefore, all children in the family are quarantined for 14 days. So even though the kids aren't sick, even though they would prefer them to be in in-person instruction, the contact tracing protocol for isolation and quarantine means those students may be out for 14 days. And so we're going to have the full-timers in, the full-timers out, and then this sort of band of travelers going back and forth depending on factors that are outside their control. So that's where our head is really going. And we're shifting beginning, well, we've started, but beginning tomorrow morning, really shifting to look at what does that virtual look like better, and then what does this band of back and forth look like, and how can that be managed in a way that makes sense. So that's sort of where our head is, you know. But again, we feel good that this plan, in addition to Mike's point of being exceeding any requirement, so this exceeds the requirement, it is also more restrictive than most. So the plans that are developing in most cases do not have a mask requirement for all students. This one does as the default. The exception in this plan is when they're removed. Most of the other places, you know, for staff, coaches, it's required, but for participants, it's not. So again, this is our best thinking at this point in order to begin to move forward, but we'll bring a revised plan back in July. We will, as much as we can say it without being long-winded, the point about, you know, tomorrow might be clear, and then 2 days from now it starts to get like more blurry in terms of what it will look like. September, in my mind, is like 17 years away. I mean, we're so far from September, my brain cannot even comprehend what that means. 10 days ago, Allegheny County numbers were declining and low. 10 days later, Dr. Bogan's doing a Sunday afternoon press conference to shut down bars. And again, part of it has to do with people's behavior going from on board and restrictive to the Wild West in terms of ignoring everything. And so, and they're trying to understand, how do we model and project things based upon all of these bizarre, not bizarre, but all of these behaviors that are happening.
Thanks for that. So I strongly support the administration's approach to this adaptive, short-term checking in is a necessity when you're facing a situation like this. Just one other perspective I'd like to offer is that with risk, there are two components to risk. There's the probability of some event happening, and then there's the damage distribution when that event happens. And we don't have a lot of control over the probability of the events that are occurring here. That's sort of the something that's exogenous outside of our control, but we can project on what some of the damage, quote unquote, damage provisions could be in terms of number of people getting sick, and so on and so forth. And so that is under our control, and we can do some homework on some of those things. And so it makes sense for that investment to take place while the health department and national experts and the state and so on will be working out some of these other projections on probabilistic events. I'll be quiet now.
I'm going to speak up as someone who's dealing with stuff like this on a different level, but very much similar. We have to maintain a sense of flexibility. We can't plan things ahead of time. Like I'm literally dealing with, okay, what am I doing with student teachers and field placement in the fall? And there's not a crystal ball. So if we try to be too rigid in our approach, it's not going to be successful. I think we have to give the administration some flexibility with the idea, yeah, we check back in and we talk to each other, but this is unprecedented. And so trying to be rigid and saying this has to be done and we have to, approve all of it now, I think, you approve it and then it has to be, iterative. We come back and we look at it as data changes. That's the only way we're going to be able to deal with this and move forward. Because if we don't deal with it that way and we say everything has to be in place, there's no way forward.
Thanks, Carla.
Agreed.
Any other comments before we vote? Can we get a roll call vote, Ms. Williams? Actually, did we get a second on the?
No, we have
I
not
already made the motion yet.
motion read yet.
Yeah, we segged right into it. I will make the motion, if we could, to approve the athletic activities health and safety plan as attached. May I have a second?
Second.
So is this including phase 2 and phase 3 approval, or phase 1 approval with more to be seen on phase 2 and phase 3?
It's including the full document there, Ben. No other stipulation on motion, except of course this discussion that we've had. Is there any other discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Dr. Mihalik,
Yes.
Dr. Campbell,
I'm going to have to vote no because I want to see more information on phase 2 and phase 3 written, or at least, I'd have to see phase 1 structured, or phase 1 only in the vote. So I'm going to say no.
Mr. Lyons,
Yes.
Mrs. Swope,
Yes.
Mr. Moy,
Yes.
Dr. Meyer,
Yes.
Mrs. Mizbach,
Yes.
Mr. DiTullio.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you, Barb. Next item 3.02 is a motion to approve the purchase of 250 all-in-one classroom sound systems at a cost of $249,990 and is attached. May I have a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? I will say this is the definition of nimble and deliberate. And we're lucky to have the resources to be able to provide this. So
I agree.
is there any need for roll call vote? Anyone? We'll just do a voice vote. All those in favor say yes. Yes.
Yes.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. One.
Peter, I'm losing you a little bit on audio. I'm not sure if anyone else is.
Yeah.
Fading
I
in and out.
Yeah, hold on. So Christine, you want to handle the personnel item? I think my connection is very slow.
Yes. Okay. So item 4.01 is personnel. Motion to approve the athletic activities health and safety plan. I'm sorry, my computer didn't switch. Come on. Sorry. I don't have the motion.
It's just a motion for personnel and supplemental items as attached.
Okay, so motion to approve the personnel items as attached. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
I'm just going to say that I'm going to vote yes this year. I voted no on this big one in the last couple of years. I want to thank the administration for looking at some changes. I still think there's a couple that could be made, but I'm very glad in particular, and the one that's going to push me over the edge to vote for it this year, I'm glad that that one was finally made.
Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Yes.
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 Opposed?
Hey, I'm sorry. Am I coming through?
Now you are.
I did have a question. Supplementals. Is there any consideration what happened in the supplemental that if the activity take place? Do we know?
There is not a clear answer in the spring. In the fall, in the fall. In the spring, if you recall, there was Act 13 that required basically continued payment. So at this point, we're planning to move forward with activities. If those activities needed to be modified, we would have expectations for the coaches, sponsors to modify and adapt their work.
And just for your awareness, in the spring, all the coaches did submit plans of what they were doing virtually with their student athletes to keep them engaged. That is something we did set an expectation of keeping kids engaged and connected as much as possible, and our coaches did a nice job with that in the spring.
Are we still under orders from the state to employ no one's allowed to be let go at all during this time as employees of the district?
It's my understanding, and I'll just share with you my understanding, that action, that direction was focused on the completion of the 1920 school year, not extended at this point to 2021. So that's my understanding about where it sits. So again, as plans develop, these are some of many questions that we're going to have to sort of anticipate and work through with our groups.
Okay.
Brian, I would confirm, because that higher ed was lumped in with Act 13, the student teaching stuff. It was spring only.
Yeah, again, I'll use another example, not to belabor the nature of this, but there are still school districts who are spending half of their time talking about the 100 days and the 990 hours that are required for instruction. There is still a lack of clarity as by the Pennsylvania Department of Education about whether virtual instruction in fact counts towards the 180 and 990 hours of instruction. That's it. It's just mind-blowing. So I have the belief that we should not even waste a half a breath on this type of stuff, but instead stay focused on the mission. How do we provide a quality education to our kids? Now, again, back to my silliness, how do we do that in person? How do we do that virtually? And how do we do that for the swath of students and staff? Imagine a staff member. So let's use Dr. Campbell. Dr. Campbell becomes COVID positive. His wife, who's feeling well and healthy is not allowed to come in to do her job in person for 14 days while under quarantine from the health department. So in addition to students, we have to be, so Kim's going to be like, oh my goodness, I got to find a way to do, I want to do something. Like, we're going to have to work this out. It's just, but people are worried about this other stuff. And I say we just keep focusing on our mission, keep focusing on the quality of our educational programming, and let some of this other stuff get sorted out in the wash.
And the situations occur at the drop of a hat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right. That's right. That's right. Yeah, that's right.
So, so where are we on this motion? We had already voted, but after Peter stepped in, so.
Well, I had that. Everybody
Yes.
voted yes.
Okay,
Right.
that
Okay.
makes sense. Do I sound okay now?
Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty kind.
So,
No idea what strain that machine behind me is doing right now. So if that does something, it may break up. But we're almost through here. We just have recognition of visitors at this point. Barb, do we have any virtual or in real life visitors?
we do not. We're all good.
Okay, then we can move to adjourn the meeting. Thank you for your time, everyone,
Thank you,
today.
everybody. Huge.
Yes.
Really appreciate it. Thank you all.
Okay, bye.
Yep.
Thanks for jumping in, Chris.